Could you please lock the door so no one leaves? Thanks, bro, for taking my time, as usual. That's for having brothers. Okay, so this talk will in part be of the continuation of Lucian talk, because he talked about users, and now I will talk about accessibility, which is really an important part of the right user experience. And I would like to start with a story of our morning routine. So this is mine. I usually wake up in the morning. I'm kind of a morning person. Then I go brush my teeth and other stuff that I won't mention. I put some music, I make myself some coffee, and after all that, I start to work. But routines are different for all kind of people. So if you are a evening person, you will have a different routine maybe in the morning. And what happens if you are a blind person? How will your routine be if you are a blind person, or if you are a deaf person? You won't hear anything and you won't see anything, so this morning routine will be different for you. And I really believe that we are all, as people, as human species, really empathic in our nature, and this is what makes us good persons. And I really believe that it is our obligation to think of every person in the world, but the question is, are we doing that? And I will give you an example. Here is some really beautiful stairs. So some architect designed these stairs, and it's really a beautiful stairs if you can walk. But if you are in a wheelchair, how does it feel for you? It feels wrong, because we didn't think functional, we thought visual. We thought, hey, let us build some beautiful stairs, or we think let us build a beautiful website. So we are thinking in a wrong perspective, and this is what Lucian talked about. So what's the situation about the web? And this is one of my favorite quotes for this particular topic, and it's for Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of World Wide Web, where he says, web users ultimately want to get the data quickly and easily. They don't care as much about attractive sites and pretty design, and it's true. And there are a lot of bad guys in this story about accessibility and about user experience on the web, and I want you to meet one of these bad guys. A familiar face. Yeah, but I'm not the only one in this particular topic. We are all, in a way, bad guys, because a couple of years ago, we didn't think about accessibility the way I think about it today. And in its nature, web should be open to everyone. And I come from a WordPress community. I know that you don't like the word WordPress here, but I really appreciate the things that we in the WordPress community do, and I really appreciate the things you and the Drupal community do, because they're both open source. We are making web a better place, and we are making web an open place for everyone. So let's ask us a question. Are we doing all we can? Because if you are blind, you don't see that beautiful parallax effect. That parallax effect doesn't mean anything to you if you can't see it. And I would definitely argue that what is important on a website is not all these nice effects, all these nice graphics, drop shadows, and all this sort of stuff that make our website bloaty, but the information. Information is always the key. And remember that. Remember when I said that functional is what is important and not visual. Visual is just a way to convey the information, but the information is the key in everything we do. So let's think of information and information architecture rather than about visual effects. So next time when a clients come and he or she says, hey, let's build this cool parallax effect, or let's hijack scroll from a website, then I think we should definitely ask why. Why are you doing that? How is this important to your website visitor who comes to your website, who will have probably a poorer experience because of that. So remember this, if we want to do a really open web, a really great website, and a really great experience for our users, we don't want to compromise on accessibility. So let's talk about the basics. How many of you have heard about these two topics? So WCAG rules and ARIA rules, how many? Not very happy with that. So WCAG, or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, basically say how much is something on a website accessible. There are 3 levels, and we are usually aiming for the AA level. So A level is basically some basic accessibility. Are you using the right tags and that sort of things? And AA means if you are using ARIA rules and that sort of things, and AAA is really advanced, something that we don't use today, primarily because it's about how the web is accessible on screen readers and that sort of things. And what I will talk today is about this second level, or AA level. And WCAG rules say that all content should be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And this sounds both cool, and this sounds both as it's not quite understandable. So let's see about what this means. Perceivable means that we should provide text alternatives and captions and make it accessible by assistive technologies. And if you are naming your images, if you're adding alt tags, that's what you are doing. You are making this website, this content accessible to people that don't use it the way that maybe myself or other of you are using it. So this is the first rule of WCAG. The second one, operable, means that everything should be accessible with a keyboard and easier to navigate. And a good example of that is if you go and use a tab key to navigate through a website, then this is how you will do it. And a thing that I usually see on a website, if you have a gallery that's open in Lightbox, and if you want to close it with the escape key, you can't. If you can, then that's a good accessibility. If you can't, then this content is not operable. It's not accessible with a keyboard. Understandable. Make text readable and let it behave in predictable ways. So this is what I say at the end. We should definitely avoid using dark UX patterns. So if it's not understandable, people will have problems using it. And using Hotjar, for example, the example that Lucian said in his earlier presentation, using all these statistics and analytics to see how are users using the website, how are they accessing the content. This is what we need to do to make the content understandable. And robust means that we will definitely make all that we are doing accessible and definitely maximize compatibility with future versions. And if we want to create an accessible web, it always starts with us. It starts with caring about our users. And if you have to make some points after this presentation, this is one of the points that I would like you to remember. And to make everything possible, there are a couple of steps that we need to follow, and the first step is semantics. So before you think of any accessibility, you should think of semantics. This is the cornerstone, this is the foundation of any website. And not only think about how will we write the content for the web, but how will the users use it. Think of the function of every web page, of every web page element, and you should definitely use appropriate code to do that. So you will use lists for navigation, you will use form elements, you will use button elements, and that sort of thing. Because doing that, you're making an accessible web. And I like this quote from Lisa Gardner, co-author of Head First Mobile Web, that said, "Support for accessibility leads to well-crafted HTML." And if you answered earlier that you don't know about WCAG roles and that sort of things, it's not a problem, because if you are writing well-crafted HTML, then you are doing a right thing. And HTML definitely progressed from the early 90s to what we know as the web today. We now have responsive websites. We now have all these devices that we are using to access the content, and it's really important. It's really important to make the content accessible on all those devices. So I will start with elements of a web page. This is something that you will probably have been using or are using as well. This is HTML5. We have three blocks of a web page: header, main block, and footer. But let's add some other content as well. Let's add a navigation, and we are having another navigation in footer as well. And now we are using HTML5 tags. We are adding header tag, footer tag, nav tag, and HTML5 is a really great add-on for web accessibility, because using nav tag means that when someone is coming to your website with a screen reader, the screen reader will say, hey, this is a navigation here. And this is a header, and this is a footer of a website. And with screen reader, they can easily navigate through your website, especially if you are using this sort of code and not the other one. And something is missing in this picture, so I would say ARIA roles to the rescue. We are adding some more meaning to all of that. So we can use HTML5 tags, but to make it even more accessible, more robust for future versions, we are adding ARIA roles. And for this part, I'm adding 3 roles. Role of banner for a header means that this is the header of a page with all that information that we are usually having in a header, like navigation, search, and that sort of functionality. Main, meaning we are adding main content in that part of the page. And content info is a role that we use usually in footer for the footer kind of information, which is maybe something that is not that important as other parts of the web page. There are a couple of things to note, though. If you have more than one navigation on your website, remember to add ARIA label saying which is the primary and which is the secondary navigation. Also, if you want to use a main tag, that's quite good. But if you're supporting all the browsers, then, as Lucian said, if you're supporting IS7 or other browsers, using the main tag isn't the way to do it. So you will use the main div with the role main to counterpart that. What about forms? There are no roles here, because forms have been with us for all those years, for decades, and you don't need to specify a role for form, but if you want to have a search form, then you will add something like this. This is an example code if you want to add a search form on your website, so you won't add a role of search on a form itself, but on a div that will be a parent element of a form. So another one of my favorite quotes is from Hayden Pickering. He's one of the best accessibility experts there is in the world. And he says that ARIA isn't for making HTML accessible. Remember, we also already have HTML5 tags, but it's for making inaccessible HTML accessible, because HTML5, it's not a perfect solution. It definitely adds the importance to emphasize which content is important, what is parts of the web page, and that sort of things, but it's not perfectly accessible, at least not right now. So if you want to remember ARIA roles, take pictures of this slide. So role banner for header, role main for main content, complementary for sidebars. So for example, if you will have sidebar in your main content area, this is the role that you will use. Then content info for footer, search for search form, and navigation for navigation menus. And don't forget to add ARIA labels if you have more than one navigation on your web page. So let's talk about headings for a minute now. First of all, don't use heading once only. I know this is something that is okay to use in HTML5. This is perfectly fine, but that's not something that I would personally recommend. I talked with a lot of accessibility experts. I'm not the accessibility expert myself, but I'm a designer working with clients from all over the world. And when I talked with them, they said, This is something it's not a really good idea to use, and the reason is there are all sort of screen readers. Someone will interpret that correctly, some will, some won't. So this is something that I consider a good practice. Add heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, and that sort of things into right order, like we did before HTML5 came into the sunlight. Also, as I said, use proper heading structure, and I really like to use this as an example. So as Drupal, WordPress is also open source, and this is an example of the code of the heading structure they use on WordPress.org, which is the main website for WordPress project. And I usually say Unicorn died when they want to access the WordPress.org website. It's really a bad example of how to use heading structure. Definitely something we could and we should improve on. So how to use heading 1? So this is an example of using heading 1 for showing site title and homepage only. See that this is the site title in heading 1. Then if you have a site tagline, you could use paragraph. I think paragraph is much better solution at using heading 2. For so many years, I did use heading 1 for site title, heading 2 for tagline, but then when you access that with a screen reader, what does a tagline really say about the website? It doesn't say any meaningful information, so this is a much better approach. But if you are on a sub-page, then you won't use heading 1 for a site title anymore, because you will use heading 1 for the main content part, main content heading on your website. So this is the change that you will probably do. This is an example of good heading structure, and I will have this talk also on PDF, so I will share it later, so you don't need actually to screenshot everything. So page title, primary navigation, language switcher, secondary content, search. This is just an example where we use headings to describe where the primary and secondary navigations are, because when someone uses screen reader to read your website, they can jump over headings, so this is a good way to make them navigate easily through your website. And headings, we forget that, and this is not something that we could do. We cannot make headings descriptive if we don't want to rewrite all the headings when we get the content for the website. But this is something our clients need to think about. So headings should be descriptive, and I want to give you an example of that. So if we have a page on how to get to Zagreb, then this will be the heading 1, of course, and then arriving by different means would be heading 2, so arriving by airplane, car, or train. And there is, I put a link down there. Yoast, which is a SEO company, has a really good article on headings use, so definitely check that. Step 3, labels, links, and text alternatives. As I said before, provide meaningful alternative text. So something that's not meaningful is if you have an image, you upload an image to your CMS, and then title of the image is DSC1234.jpg. That's not a meaningful description. This doesn't mean anything to someone coming with screen reader. So definitely we should provide meaningful alternate text. So this is an example. I have a lot of examples in this presentation. So if we have an image of birds in migration, this is an example of what we will use as the alternate text. Also, links should be descriptive. What does it mean? I will show you 2 examples. One is the bad one. So how many of you have used click here on your website? And come on, you should all, we have all done it. This is a bad example, because if someone is coming to a website with a screen reader, what does click here means? What will happen if I click here? I don't know. I might know that if I am on a website and I can look at it, but if I can't, if I'm using screen readers, any other tool to access the website, click here doesn't mean anything. So a good example would be to use a descriptive links. And if you want to have a link to About Us page, I would suggest something like learn more about our company on our About Us page, with About Us being a link to that page. Use area labels to name objects, and I gave you the example earlier. So if we have more than a couple of navigation on our website, we'll use area labels to sort that navigations. Also, area labels could be used for other elements, not only navigation, for other elements. If you have a couple of forms, you could use area label to name those forms as well. Pagination, an example of using area labels there, and this is quite important because I'm showing you the example of something that we are usually seeing as a visual aid. So if we are on a current page, we are usually having this link styled differently. But if we are not seeing that, if we are not seeing colors correctly, if we have problems seeing, if we have all sort of other difficulties, we won't see that. So having an area label, if we use software to go to a website, is something that is meaningful. And text alternatives for non-text content. An example here from for a sort of a control where we have a star rating for something. So how to add a context to that. So we are using area label by star ID, and by saying that, we are basically saying that how many stars are here, 4 out of 5. So this is the way to label that sort of things. Menu switchers. If I ask you how you do menu switchers, we probably do it wrong, because in the past I used like a link to menu switch, but we should definitely use buttons instead of links or a div. And the reason why we do that is because buttons are focusable elements and divs are not. So if you would use a div on your website as a menu switcher, you should definitely make this div a focusable element, because without doing so, we will have problems accessing that content. And remember when I said that we're sometimes using tabs to navigate through our website? So if that's not a focusable element, tab won't get it. And I won't mention, but I have seen some websites recently because of our election here in Croatia, and most of that websites are not accessible. So it's not a really good example of how to be accessible. Well, politicians are not that accessible. I'm shocked. What happens when we expand the menu? So we have this visual aid. If we are on our mobile phone and we click on a menu switcher, the menu expands. But what happens if we are using a screen reader? We are adding area expanded property to show if menu is open or closed. An example of that, this is an example of how will you create accessible menus. So use buttons. Area expanded is false if the menu is not expanded, and area expanded is true if menu is expanded. Quite straightforward. It's not that hard to do. And I'm another person now that I'm not using links anymore. Great. Wow. Step 5, screen reader, text and keyboard access. If we want to make something not visible on a website, an example of that is we have some other sort of visual aids, and we want to remove that from being seen on a website. The easiest way to do it would be using display none, but it's not the right way. So I suggest that you use a class. I have this class that I usually use, screen reader text. This is the CSS that will basically hide what you don't want to be visible on your website, but this will still be accessible to people using screen readers. An example of that, so we have additional information with somewhere in the sidebar. So maybe additional information would mean if we are on a tourist website, we want to show recommended hotels, recommended restaurants, and that sort of things. But we don't actually need the heading there because it's descriptive visually as it is. But nevertheless, we don't want to remove the heading. Here's the way to do it correctly. And focus. Focus is a sort of thing that we usually don't care maybe that much about it, because personally for so many years I removed focus styles because the focus styles that were default in browsers were ugly. And this is only one example of why removing that is not okay, because if you navigate through your website with a tab key, you won't see those focus styles. And another one is, if skip links is not the first focusable element on your page, then this is not as accessible as it should be. So skip link is something that when nothing is focusable, nothing is in focus on your website, and you click a tab key, this is the first thing you will want to see. An example of that, a lot of examples as I said, screen reader only, just to make it not visible on website usually until it's focusable. Also, as I said, don't remove focus styles, rather improve on that. For years I removed focus styles, so I'm really a bad guy, as I said before. But for the past 2-3 years, I tried to think about these small improvements that I can improve my own process of designing and creating websites. And I'm now improving on focus styles and not removing them. And definitely don't remember this part. We should definitely add an indication that something is focused with a subtle background color change, a border, or a text decoration. So when we are navigating a website, we see this small change. If we don't see that small change, we won't see what's really focused. And if we hit enter to go to that link that we are actually wanting to go, that won't happen because we will end on a different page. Forms. This is a standard form code pretty much for myself that I'm using. Using, of course, label and inputs, using for to show what will happen when I click on a label, what input field will be selected. Also, if I don't want to have a label, I'm using the class that I mentioned earlier, screen reader only. So this will be hidden from a website. And I'm also adding a placeholder to the input field. This is when I don't have maybe enough room for labels and input fields. I want to add placeholders and information for people seeing the website normally, and for those using the screen readers to access the website, I'm still having the label there, and everything will work just fine. Text sizes and contrast. Don't forget to make text readable. The examples of headings that I mentioned before. Allow users to change text size. So nowadays this is quite straightforward. People using browsers can zoom on something. It's not a big deal anymore. But remember to use CSS styles that will allow users to change that. Maybe add another value if you want to have the better experience for people wanting to have a bigger text, so you don't just use the default browser zoom, but rather give it a better experience by designing that experience. Also, something that designers thinking about visuals often forget, fonts should be of appropriate weights. So everything looks so much nicer and professional if you use a light font, but it's not something that users will be very fond of. The thing that you should also remember, contrast ratio. And contrast ratio should be 4.5 to 1 for AA level and 7 to 1 for AAA. An example of that. So the first one on top left is a ratio 12:1, which is quite good. So this is a foreground color of some black-gray variant and a white background. Then we have a ratio 5.74:1, so AA level, also good. But then on the bottom left, we have a ratio of 2.85:1, which is a fail. If someone who has color blindness or someone who has different problems accessing your website, they will have substantial problems reading that content. Also, I gave an example of ratio 21:1, which is basically using white on a dark background or vice versa. But I would definitely suggest to use this ratio. This is, from my experience, something that works best. An example of using light fonts and not. So this is a really bad visibility. And how many times have you seen that on sliders? So clients have this beautiful stock photo of something in their sliders. They have light font, but when people come to that, they don't get it. They don't see the text. So sometimes they need to resize the browser because the text is on the clouds. But we can improve on that. We could use much higher contrast, or even better, we could use bolded or heavier font, and it's easily done. Sometimes you will use probably overlay color to overlay the image, and with that you will have the just enough contrast and visibility to make the text readable. So the current status of web accessibility. How many of you have worked with, I don't know, IF4, Netscape Navigator? Come on, okay. And the web goes forward. We got web standards, we got HTML5, now we are designing for responsive look and feel. We are having all those devices that we are accessing the web now. And I really believe that accessibility will be the next big thing, because we should always focus on the content and think about semantics while doing that. And we should remember that everything should be keyword accessible and ready for the future, because accessibility is the next big thing, because better accessibility means better Google rankings. And a couple of months ago, I was talking on a conference in Belfast, and I spoke from one of the directors from Google, and we talked about how accessibility helps improve search results. And of course, he won't say how the Google searches the website, how he ranks, but he said two things: content and accessible. So content means that Google really values good content, really values that the text is concise, the headings are good, the content and everything on the website is descriptive. And Google will value the accessibility the same way Google values responsive websites now. And better accessibility means better user experience. And better accessibility at the end means that we are building truly open web. And this is a great quote from Malala Yousafzai, Nobel Peace Prize winner from 2014, when she says, "One teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world." So these small things that we are doing, and accessibility is only a small part of web experience, can change the world. Because if we want to have a truly open web, every person matters. Because at the end, the person we are missing out could be the person who will one time change the world. So think about it after this presentation, and thank you for your time. Are there any questions? Thank you. I don't have any presents, sorry.
Thank you for the presentation. I must say I really enjoy presentations in this Drupal camp. Thank you for such presentations, and thank you for organizers. Yeah,
organizers did a great job. Can we have a round of applause for organizers?
Yeah, sure.
So the question is...
I have like 3 questions, but I can just ask one and then we'll see. developer question: how do you test the accessibility? Is there like I never used a screen reader. It's like a new topic to me. I don't know if they have breakpoints or so. Are there any tools or things like we test breakpoints for mobile devices in Chrome with this debugging tool? How do we test that, and how do you do this? How do you reports?
Okay, I will be honest. I said that I'm a bad guy, so I don't do everything right. I know, Lucian, there is a tool for testing accessibility. You used it, right? Yeah. What's it called?
It's Totally.js. There are several tools. One is one of the services I mentioned. It's Tenon.io, which you can use basically to paste your HTML, and it goes like crawls through your website, through your HTML, and sees if you have like alt on images and things like that. And there is Totally.js, which is by Khan Academy developers, which is quite helpful because some of the things that you mentioned, like color contrast, which is hard to test. I mean, you have to have some sort of tool for testing that. It highlights all the colors. So you can just see like everything that's marked red. You can see what is the color contrast and what can be used to improve the contrast. So those are the tools that I have used personally.
Those are two tools, but as I said, we are usually using that tools on projects that we work. For example, for the city of Rijeka, the project that we did, we used that tools to see that sort of things. But actually what is in this presentation is what I got from meeting all those people on conferences. So I asked them about all these specific things, and my accessibility story starts at the first WordCamp Europe back in 2013, where I was part of the accessibility team, and there is how you know how you start working on that. Well, at least for me. And if you use the things that I mentioned in this presentation, you are quite good to go. You are covering the most important part of accessibility. And probably some of you, or maybe even every of you, are using small parts. You're using heading structure. You are probably adding alt text to the images. The biggest problem for me was probably the form. I didn't know how to use the search role, for example. This is the example that I gave you, to use the div outside the form as a parent element to have it the right role. And the second biggest problem is the menu switchers. So using divs is not a right way to do it, but using the code I showed you, the button element is the right way to do it. So I hope that using the tools that Lucian mentioned, and by using the things that I showed you in this presentation, you will try to make this next step in your accessibility voyage.
Hi, my name is Vince. Thanks for a great presentation. I would challenge your example on GoodLink, and I would say it is a bad example.
Which one?
Example about links.
Okay.
How to use links. It doesn't link anywhere.
Yeah, because I don't have the.
Yeah, no, yeah. But it is an example.
Yeah.
So
okay.
The example. So
it's true.
I could just assume that event would be prevented and asynchronously would be content loaded and
yeah. So I use the hashtag.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I should use about HTML.
Yes. But what about the JavaScript?
So
in a highly dynamic.
Okay. Okay. So the example of links is how to actually name something a link. So having a graph, I know. So you're the first person that mentioned that. So kudos for that. But if you are not using the hashtag, then of course you won't have a problem. And why would you want to use JavaScript to prevent opening a link? Can you give me an example of that?
Because you would asynchronously load for example.
Yeah, but there is a link. There is a link, and you're, for example, going to About Us page. What will happen when you click a link?
Well,
it will open the next page.
In this case, at best,
this is where I use hash. Yes. Instead of I had to use about.html or something like that. Yes. But removing that, we're all good, right?
Yes. If you insert a real. But the question would be, what about the dynamic pages?
You're linking to a page that exists on a website.
I mean, from accessibility standpoint, how are the
I think I don't understand the question. Okay.
I think you are talking about web apps and things like that, right?
Yes, yes.
So what you can use is you can either use the hash for the link, and you can use the area label to describe what happens when it's clicked. And there are some ARIA roles, I'm not sure how they're called, which are added when something changes on the page, which alerts the screen readers that there is new content on the website. There are several types you can use, like make a loud suggestion for the screen reader, make only a silent suggestion. That's something that's usually used on sliders when you're having like multiple slides and one is current or something changes. So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what is the correct, I haven't used that like a really long time, but you could probably Google it.
Thanks.
Any more questions? I think we're out of time. Okay.
My turn? Okay.
Sure.
My question is heading into a connection between CMS and accessibility.
Okay.
In a way that, let's say a client want to heavily play with KVs, K-visuals, I mean slides, landing page blocks and stuff like that. And to allow them to do so effectively in terms of accessibility, it's really hard. Because if we allow them as developers, CMS creators, to change background image and label on top of it, then we have font sizes, we have colors for background, for font. How do you approach this? So the first version of KV is great, but when they upload a new image, background image.
I understand you. Okay, so I see this as a three-layer problem. First layer is the client, second layer is the code you wrote, and the third layer is a user accessing the website. So what I suppose you will need to do is in this second layer where you can help to do something with the content that the client is writing. So one thing is to enforce client to use the right values for title, for labels, alt tags, and that sort of thing. It's not the most popular thing to do. So my approach is, and would be recommended to you as well, to explain to client why accessibility matters. And the best way to do it, especially if client is selling something or is really wants to have better conversions on some sort, to explain them that having an accessible website will help them with Google results. So this is my approach, and that usually works. And of course, I'm trying to see what will be the problems between client accessing the website and editing the website, and I try to overcome those. So for example, if you're having heading of a website, and this is a heading that is a special field in the CMS, and you have an image that is also not part of the WYSIWYG editor, but somewhere where you upload the image, you don't ask a client to name the alt tag, but you just use the heading. So this is the example of how you can overcome those problems. You could always ask client to write something, but if he doesn't or she doesn't, then you just assume something and you have that as the description or alt tag or that sort of thing. I don't know if I answered the question, but we could definitely talk afterwards about it. So 3 links here and the other links as well.
So my question is, when you design and test accessible websites, do you take into consideration different types of people with disabilities, like maybe people with ADD, attention deficit disorder, and do you have any good practices for them? And also, is it just maybe making a good usability website.
So, as I said, I'm a designer and not accessibility experts. I know a couple of people that are doing extensive accessibility tests, but that's not something that is possible here in Croatia. And even working with clients outside Croatia, it's a problem because I'm a freelancer, I'm not a company, so I cannot ask my client to pay that sort of stuff. So what I usually do, I take care of the accessibility the way I showed you here without announcing that specially to the client. Of course, what I said in the previous answer, I usually talk to client about the importance of accessibility, of adding all those descriptions, alt tag, captions, naming the links correctly. And actually what I'm talking about it's not about the accessibility itself, but about the content. Because if you write a good content, and if you structure the content correctly, you're doing a great job towards accessibility. Because there are parts that the client can change, for example, in the WYSIWYG editor, the central part of the web page. But then again, there are a lot of parts that they can't change directly. So sidebar navigation, this is something that probably he will just add the pages or some other content to that, but how the technical will that work is something that you will do. So again, I'm not sure if I just got the answer to the question.
I think maybe everything you talked today about mostly relates to blind or visually impaired people. And as far as I have been reading, people with attention deficit disorder really rely on, I don't know, cleanliness of web design and not reading justified texts and stuff like that. And so do you know anything about that?
Sorry about that. So having justified text on a website is never a good idea, really. Sometimes clients even try to justify the text in the WYSIWYG editor, and what I usually do on that part, I just use the CSS to override that. And then clients say, hey, I tried that for 10 minutes and it doesn't work. Where's the problem? And I said, yeah, it's not a good thing to do. This is
a combination of good usability.
Yeah.
And also accessibility for people with ADD. And so do you have maybe some more practices like
that? If you ask me, all the websites should be clean with a focus really on the content and not on the visual style. So I never used parallax effects. I never used scroll hijackings. I always try to use as much free space, as much as white space as possible, because this makes content easier to read, and not only for people with ADD, but for everybody.
Sorry, I have to interrupt. I think we don't have any time left.
Thank you. You can ask questions afterwards.
Thank you very much for the presentation.